Greetings, dear viewers. Welcome to the Ruslan Belov channel. In today's episode, we will examine the development of the situation on Ukrainian territory as of December 13, 2025. Key changes at the current moment are occurring on the Huliaipole direction. Modifications to the map are also being recorded on the Pokrovsk direction in the zone of the Dobropilya salient. And notably, changes are being observed on the Sumy direction, where Russian forces are breaking through Ukrainian defenses and increasing the area of controlled territories. From other sections of combat operations, news is predominantly arriving, which we will review and analyze in this video material. And before we begin, according to established tradition, I would like to wholeheartedly ask you to subscribe to the channel. As you know, your subscription provides tremendous support for the channel's development. I express my gratitude to everyone who subscribes. Next, we move to analyzing the situation in the area of the settlement of Huliaipole, where Russian armed forces continue offensive operations. Today, the map, as you can notice, underwent significant modifications. As of December 12, 2025, the picture looked as follows. As of today, the map acquires new contours. We observe that Russian forces are actively advancing on the Ukrainian side of the Huliaipole River in the southeastern sector of the city. Today, sources released video materials, and on these recordings, we can observe the advancement of Russian formations along Velika Street. On these frames, we have the opportunity to see combat operations in this sector, as well as video evidence testifying to the presence of Russian units. Based on this video, we made a correction in the southeastern part of the city of Huliaipole. Russian forces are actively advancing. Another video was released from the northern part of Huliaipole. These frames were published by Ukrainian sources, and on these recordings we can observe FPV drone attacks on Russian armed forces units along Tardova and Daknaya streets. Based on these frames, we also made a correction. On December 12th, the map in Huliaipole had the following appearance. Today there are already grounds to believe that the Russian army has physically consolidated the northern part. Moreover, this information finds confirmation in a number of pro-Russian and neutral cartographic services. Russian forces at the current moment, as we can see, are still conducting battles for the streets and structures adjacent to the Huliaipole River. This is a critically important phase of the battle for Huliaipole. If Russian formations manage to consolidate positions, then it will be possible to begin the countdown for all remaining positions on the territory of Huliaipole. Next, we move to examining the situation in the area of the settlements of Myrnohrad and Pokrovsk. Today, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation reports that Ukrainian armed forces attempted to unblock the AFU grouping on the territory of Myrnohrad. The strike was delivered from the direction of Shevchenko. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation informs that this counter-strike involved an enormous number of assault formations with Western equipment. However, the Ministry of Defense reports that this attack was repelled. Ukrainian armed forces suffered losses and were forced to retreat. At the same time, today changes also affected the territory of the settlement of Myrnohrad. On December 12th, the map looked as follows. Today, according to various neutral cartographic services, the map in this sector was corrected in the southeastern part of that remainder of Myrnohrad, which still remains under AFU control. On the Dobropilya salient, minor changes are being recorded, and news is also arriving. Regarding the settlement of Rodinske, here counter-battles are occurring, but intensity has already decreased. Here earlier, the AFU counterattacked Russian positions, trying to push out Russian forces in this settlement, in the area of Rodinske. But nevertheless, the front line here remains stable. Also, Russian forces struck AFU positions in the area of Chernihivka. Here, Russian aviation worked, and FAB strikes were delivered on AFU temporary deployment points. And regarding the settlements of Sofievka, Shakov, Vladimirivka, and Toretsk, news is arriving, changes are being recorded. Vladimirivka completely came under Russian control. As of today, the territory marked in red came under full Russian control. The Ukrainian side acknowledged the loss of these territories. Let me remind you that confirming information arrives either from the Russian or Ukrainian side, and the Ukrainian side acknowledged the loss of this territory. From pro-Russian sources, no confirming information, aside from news reports, arrived from here. Thus, we color Vladimirivka in favor of the Russian army. Regarding Shakov, from here so far no confirming information from either pro-Russian or pro-Ukrainian sources has arrived. But nevertheless, news is arriving that Shakov is under full Russian control, and Russian forces are now conducting clearing operations on the northern outskirts of Sofiivka, and assault operations on Toretsk are already being conducted. There are changes in this section of combat operations. Again, this territory is colored in favor of the Russian army in pro-Ukrainian cartographic services. Thus, we can conclude that indeed Shakov is probably under Russian control, and possibly even the greater part of Sofiivka is already under RF armed forces control. And as soon as we receive confirming information, most likely Russian forces will provide information in the form of video materials where they install the flag of the Russian Federation, and we will make changes to the map. Based on news reports, let me remind you, we do not make changes. As of today, such are the news and changes here. Next, we move to the Kostyantynivka sector. Russian units continue assault operations. Today, some pro-Russian analysts declare that Russian forces managed to take under full control a series of strongpoints located south of Kostyantynivka and east of the settlement of Bereztok. In all likelihood, in the near future, the Russian army will possibly begin the assault on Bereztok, which of course could significantly improve the positions of the Russian army in the southern part of Kostyantynivka. In the very near future, combat operations of very high intensity should be expected here. Next, we move to the Siversk direction. Today, the map in this sector again underwent changes. Just yesterday, we discussed that Russian armed forces units advanced on the territory of Siversk, and a video was published about this by the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, where we could observe a large number of Russian servicemen who were raising flags in various parts of the city. Based on this video material, we made a correction yesterday, as well as based on Ministry of Defense reports. Today we are making an additional correction in this direction, and today we see that the Russian army, according to various analysts, is advancing further west, advancing following the retreating Ukrainian units. Also today, Ukrainian sources publish video from the territory of Pokrovsk. On these frames, we can observe FPV drone strikes on Russian units and on positions of the Russian armed forces on the territory of the settlement in the area of School Number 1. Here we see strikes on positions, and the author of this video claims that Russian forces were located here. Based on these frames, we also made a small correction in the central part of Pokrovsk. And based on these frames and these video materials, we see that the Russian army is gradually advancing further west, with the aim of reaching the outskirts of Reznikivka, and so on. We move to the Krasny Lyman direction. From the Krasny Lyman direction, news is arriving mainly from Yarova and Drobyshev. It is reported here that fierce combat operations are being conducted for Yarova. Despite the fact that from this point video material arrived where advanced Russian positions were located, Yarova for the most part nevertheless remains under AFU control, and offensive operations in the direction of this settlement are ongoing and fierce combat operations are being conducted. The same applies to Drobyshev. Here, Russian forces earlier expanded the zone of control on the eastern outskirts of this settlement, but further advancement here at the current moment is not being recorded. News of fierce combat operations is arriving. Also, Russian forces are striking AFU positions in Lyman itself and in the area of Dubrova. From this point, video material arrived on which Russian forces delivered a FAB 3000 strike on an AFU temporary deployment point. I uploaded this video to the Telegram channel. A link to the Telegram channel is indicated in the description. You can follow the link and watch this video. Here, after the arrival of the FAB 3000, nothing remained of the building, and naturally, whoever was in this building, nothing remained of them either. As of today, no advances are being recorded here, except for this section of combat operations. Here, the Ukrainian side acknowledged the loss of this territory. But let me remind you that materials confirming the expansion of the zone of control from pro-Russian sources were received earlier, and the map looks as follows. In pro-Russian sources, in pro-Ukrainian sources, the map is colored in this way. They don't even acknowledge the loss of Chandriholov. But despite this, Chandriholov has already been lost and is under Russian control. Next, we move to the Kupiansk section of the front, where combat operations continue, where the Ukrainian army continues its counter-offensive. Over the past day, the map again underwent changes. On December 12th, the map looked as follows. Today, new corrections are being made according to data provided by various neutral cartographic services. Let me remind you that just yesterday, a video was published from the territory of the H-26 road, where Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky gives an interview regarding the situation on the ground, publishes information about how things stand today on the Kupiansk section of the front. And yesterday, major corrections were made according to pro-Ukrainian cartographers in the northern part of Kupiansk. Today, additional information is arriving. However, in addition to corrections toward neutral territories or territories covered by grey zones, video materials were also published where we could observe how Ukrainian FPV drone operators strike at advanced positions of the Russian army. That is, these video materials also confirm the front line and where Russian units are still located. At the present moment, a heavy, fierce counter-battle is ongoing. However, there is a very important point. In all likelihood, to organize a counter-strike in the area of Kupiansk, the Ukrainian side was forced to take reserves from the Sumy section of the front. And due to the fact that at the present moment on Sumy territory all reserves were transferred toward Kupiansk, the Russian army went on the counter-offensive with the aim of restoring control over all territories that were lost during the Ukrainian counter-offensive that ended several months ago. And on this map, in this sector, we observe and see certain corrections. Over the past several days, the map was corrected as follows. Today, according to neutral cartographic services, the Russian army again approached close to the settlement of Andriivka, and also the Russian army advanced in the area of Kostyantynivka, and in all likelihood, the Russian army will continue the offensive toward the city of Sumy in order to force the Ukrainian command to return reserves back toward the Sumy section of the front. If this does not happen, then a real threat from Russian units may hang over the city of Sumy. The administration of Donald Trump continues to rethink its approach to international politics. In particular, the White House is discussing the idea of creating a Core 5, a Key 5 format for dialogue among great powers, which would include Russia, China, India, and Japan. Experts are debating whether this is a deliberate trial balloon or an attempt to recalibrate the existing world order. The Trump administration is considering the creation of the Core 5 as an alternative to the G7. According to Politico, the group would include the United States, Russia, China, India, and Japan. It is assumed that such a step could help reduce escalation between Washington, Moscow, and Beijing. Trump has often sought to strike deals with rival countries. For example, he approved the sale of NVIDIA H200 artificial intelligence chips to China and sent his envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner for direct talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin, the publication notes. At the same time, Defense One reports that the idea of the Key 5 was included in an early draft of the updated U.S. national security strategy, but for unknown reasons was later removed from the document. Notably, the initiative generated significant interest among American officials. Thus, Toretsk, former Director for European Affairs at the U.S. National Security Council, emphasized that this concept perfectly aligns with Trump's worldview. In her assessment, he seeks to shape international dialogue through a sympathy toward other great powers that have spheres of influence in different regions. Tausig also interpreted Europe's absence from the proposed grouping as a direct signal from Washington to Brussels. The United States views Russia as a powerful force capable of maintaining its own zone of interests in the old world. Meanwhile, Michael Sobolik, a former aide to Senator Ted Cruz, described the idea of the Key 5 as a huge step forward for American diplomacy. At the same time, the composition of the proposed grouping also raises questions. Political analyst Alexei Naumov, for example, is surprised by China's inclusion. From the very beginning, Trump viewed the PRC as an adversary and a competitor, and rapprochement with Russia was supposed to serve the goal of breaking, or at least weakening, the ties between Moscow and Beijing. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin has long stated that Russia does not accept a new division of the world along the lines of a bloc system, as this could lead the planet into a new confrontation. As for the G7, the president has noted that he does not see how, under the current circumstances, Moscow could interact with the Seven. The idea of the Core 5 is extremely indicative because it clearly demonstrates whom the United States perceives as a great power, and Russia, accordingly, is viewed as a force without which an objective dialogue about the future world order is impossible, explained Dmitry Suslov, Deputy Director of the Center for Comprehensive European and International Studies at the Higher School of Economics. As for the European Union, the United States sees the members of this bloc as fading countries whose influence on international politics is steadily shrinking. It is important to note that in developing the concept of the Five, Washington did not take the geographical factor into account at all. There is a clear lack of representation from a number of entire regions, he said. This means that the United States does not see centers of power equal to itself in Africa, Latin America, or the Middle East. In this context, many may ask, why then is Japan included in the Core Five? The answer is simple. From the White House's point of view, Tokyo has not declined as severely as Brussels, the expert believes. Ultimately, Japan has a strong industrial base and is a significant partner for Washington in the Asia-Pacific region in terms of competition with China. Moreover, Japan is fundamentally important for Trump in the revival of American manufacturing. It is also worth noting that Tokyo possesses substantial military potential, the interlocutor utочняет, and the fact that right-wing forces are in power in the country openly appeals to the White House. Therefore, for the United States, Japan is an ideal partner in the new format, capable of steering the nature of discussions in America's favor. How Russia should respond to Washington's initiative remains unclear for now. On the one hand, the initiative is the right one. The world is desperately in need of a forum of states that would unite the key centers of power. There is the G20, but it has too many participants, which paralyzes the bloc's work. Moreover, the 20 was originally designed for discussions of economic issues, the expert adds. On the other hand, Moscow has always been guided by the principle of UN centrality. In this regard, we would like to see the UN Security Council as the central institution of a multipolar world order. However, it includes France and Britain, which often take an unconstructive stance. In addition, such a significant power as India is absent from the Security Council, Suslov emphasizes. Trump is trying to look beyond the immediate future, into a time when, according to his forecasts, Europe will completely lose its agency, believes American studies expert Dmitry Drobnitsky. However, even now Washington assesses Brussels' cultural and economic significance as minimal, he stresses. This concludes, dear viewers. Thank you for watching, subscribe to the channel, leave your likes, and all the best to you.